He looked like a man with nothing left to lose, and that's exactly what made him the most dangerous person in the county. The rich man in the $1,000 sparring gear saw a broken-down rancher in dusty boots. He didn't see the years of training buried underneath. He didn't know that some men never talk about the violence they've survived. They just lock it away and hope they never need it again. Hey everyone, I'm Casey, and today I'm bringing you a story sent in from a small town out west. A story about a quiet old rancher, a loud young millionaire, and the fight that neither of them would ever forget. The barbed wire snapped taut with a sound like a plucked guitar string. Walt Sutton held the tension in a heavy leather glove, feeling it hum up through his forearm. Sweat cut lines through the dust on his neck. It was 92 degrees in Ironwood, Montana, and the sun sat on his shoulders like a physical weight. Walt twisted the wire tie, clamped it with his pliers, and exhaled slow. He was 52. His back ached when it rained, and his left knee held a titanium pin that still set off airport scanners. Not that he flew anywhere anymore. He owned 300 acres of stubborn, dry earth. It wasn't much, but it was quiet, and lately that quiet was costing him. A cloud of dust rolled fast down the county road. Walt didn't look up right away. He kept checking the spacing on his cedar posts, but the engine noise wasn't right for a rutted dirt road. High-pitched, expensive. German engineering where it had no business being. A blacked-out luxury SUV skidded to a stop beside Walt's rusted-out pickup, washing it in a fresh coat of white dust. Walt set his pliers down slowly. He didn't bother brushing off his shirt. He just waited. The driver's door swung open and out stepped Bryce Kessler. 33 years old, built like a fitness magazine cover, radiating the kind of restless aggression that comes from never once being told no. He'd made a fortune in tech, cashed out early, and decided he wanted to play cowboy. He'd bought the 2,000 acres bordering Walt's land, built a glass and steel mansion on the ridge, and turned an old barn into a mixed martial arts gym. He was a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and within 2 days of moving to town, everyone in Ironwood knew it. "Sutton," Bryce barked, slamming his door. He crossed the gravel in spotless ostrich-skin boots, stopping just a little too close, a fighter's habit, owning the center of the ring. "You ignored my lawyer's letter," Bryce said. "No hello. No nod." "Didn't ignore it," Walt said, voice low and even. "Threw it away." Bryce's smile went tight at the edges. "That access road cuts through the corner of my property, old man. I'm gating it. You'll use the county highway from now on." "Deed gives me an easement," Walt said. 60 years now. "I don't care what some paper from the 60s says," Bryce snapped, yanking his sunglasses down to glare over the rims. "I've got sparring partners flying in from Vegas next week. I'm not having your junk truck rattling past my facility at 5 in the morning." "Truck doesn't rattle," Walt said. Bryce looked him over, the faded shirt, the sweat-stained hat, the worn hands, and saw exactly what he wanted to see. Weakness. "I offered you 10 grand for the rights. That's generous. Take it because the gate goes up Friday. Try driving through and I'll have you trespassed." Walt studied him, not his eyes, his stance. Weight forward on the lead leg, chin up, exposed. It wasn't a decision he made. It was a scan running quietly in the back of a mind that had never fully powered down. "Fence makes a good neighbor," Walt said, turning back to his tools. "A gate just makes a prisoner. I'll be using that road Friday, same as always." Bryce's face went red, a vein rising in his neck. He was used to people folding in boardrooms on mats. He wasn't used to being turned away from. "You're making a mistake. I'm not some local you can out-stubborn. You don't know who you're dealing with." Walt picked up his post-hole digger and didn't look back. "Have a good afternoon." Bryce stood there 5 long seconds, looking foolish in the silence, before he cursed, spun on his heel and roared off, spraying gravel against the side of Walt's truck. Walt didn't flinch. He just watched the dust settle and went back to work. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and old grease. Walt sat in his usual back booth, facing the door like always, working through a plate of meatloaf. The bell over the entrance jingled hard, and the quiet of the place shattered. Bryce walked in with three of his training partners, loud, wired from a hard sparring session, laughing with their whole chests. The waitress, a 60-year-old woman named Doreen, went stiff behind the counter. Bryce slapped a bill on the counter without looking at her, then scanned the room until his eyes landed on the back booth. A grin spread across his face. He led his crew straight over, surrounding Walt's table. "Boys," Bryce said, "meet my neighbor. Big fan of historical fiction, specifically old property deeds." His friends chuckled. One cracked his knuckles. "How's the fence coming, old man?" Bryce asked. "Holding," Walt said quietly, setting down his fork. The small clink sounded to him like a hammer strike. "Heard you went to the sheriff about my gate," Bryce sneered. "Told you it's civil. Told you to get a lawyer, but we both know you can't afford one." "Can barely afford that slop you're eating." Walt wiped his mouth with a napkin. "You're standing in my light, Weston." The diner went dead silent. Doreen froze mid-pour. Bryce's smile vanished, the disrespect too public, too naked for his ego to absorb. "You've got some nerve," he hissed, slamming both palms on the table hard enough to slosh coffee over the rim. "I'm dragging this dead-end town into the future. Bringing money, bringing prestige. And you're standing in the dirt clutching a piece of paper." Walt looked at the spilled coffee, then slowly raised his eyes. No glare, no scowl. Just a flat, empty stare, the look of a man assessing a condemned building before it comes down. "You bring money," Walt said, barely above a whisper. "You bring noise, but you don't bring respect. And you don't own the road." Bryce straightened, playing to his crowd. "Respect? You think you deserve respect because you're old and shovel manure. I'm a black belt. I've competed internationally. I've choked out men twice your size. You want respect, you step on a mat and take it." "I don't play games on mats," Walt said. "Because you can't," Bryce shot back. He grabbed the salt shaker off the table, tossed it in the air, caught it, then dropped it straight into Walt's gravy. Doreen gasped. One of Bryce's friends laughed. Walt stared at the ruined plate. He didn't sigh. He didn't raise his voice. The stillness in him just deepened, the kind of quiet that comes right before the ocean pulls back before a wave hits shore. He slid out of the booth and stood, 2 inches shorter than Bryce, 30 pounds lighter but perfectly balanced, arms loose. "You owe Doreen for the food." Bryce laughed in his face. "I'll buy the whole diner if I want." Walt dropped a tin on the table and stepped past him, his shoulder brushing Bryce's chest, not a shove, just a claim of space. Bryce grabbed his shoulder. "I'm not done talking to you." The instant his fingers closed on the denim, the air in the diner changed. Walt didn't pull away and didn't throw a punch. In one fluid motion too fast to fully track, he turned, caught Bryce's wrist, and applied precise pressure to a nerve point. Bryce's hand went numb instantly, his knees buckling a fraction of an inch, a gasp tearing out of him. Walt held it 2 seconds, then let go. Bryce stumbled back, clutching his wrist, staring at Walt like he was trying to solve a math problem that made no sense. It shouldn't have been possible. The old man hadn't even looked like he was trying. "Don't touch me again," Walt said, adjusting his collar. The humiliation hit Bryce like a fist. In front of his crew, in front of the whole diner, the self-proclaimed apex predator had just been swatted aside by a man who looked like he shopped at the feed store. His face went purple. He dropped into a fighting stance. "You want a sucker punch? Let's go right here." "I didn't punch you," Walt said. "I asked you to stop touching me." "You're dead," Bryce snarled, stepping forward until one of his own friends grabbed his shoulder. "Chill, man, not in here. Sheriff pulls your gym's license if you jump a local in a diner." Bryce shrugged him off but stopped, chest heaving, finger shaking as he pointed at Walt. "You think a parlor trick makes you tough? You think you can embarrass me in front of these people? You embarrassed yourself, son, Walt said. Friday, Bryce snapped, loud enough for the whole room. The Harvest Day Festival. They put up a ring for charity bouts every year. You and me, 3 rounds. Or do you only fight when nobody's watching? Walt turned for the door. I don't fight for charity. I don't fight for fun. If you don't show, Bryce called after him, making sure everyone heard, I won't just gate that road. I'll buy the note on your ranch and foreclose. I'll bury you in legal fees till you're living out of that truck. Show up Friday or I take everything you own. Walt stopped, hand on the door. Outside, the sky had gone bruised purple. He'd spent 20 years overseas doing things in the dark that still woke him up sweating. He'd given up his youth, his peace of mind, damn near his soul, to make sure he'd never have to use any of it again. He'd built a whole quiet life around that promise to himself. Bryce wasn't just threatening the land. He was rattling the bars of a cage Walt had spent 2 decades welding shut. Walt turned around slowly. He looked past the 3 younger men, past Doreen frozen with her coffee pot, straight into Bryce's eyes. The flat, empty stare was gone. What replaced it was worse. It was focus. Friday, Walt said. The word landed like a dropped anvil. 3 rounds. He walked out without waiting for a reply. Inside, nobody said a word. Bryce lowered his hands, smirking at his friends. I'm going to kill him, he whispered. But as his buddy watched Walt's taillights pull away, a cold knot formed in his stomach. He'd seen the look in that old man's eyes. It wasn't fear. It was the look of a man already deciding where to bury something. But what happened Friday night would leave the whole town talking for years. The Harvest Day Festival smelled like fried dough, diesel, and livestock. Ferris wheels spun against the black Montana sky, throwing long shadows over the gravel lot behind the high school field. Past the petting zoo and the beer tent, they'd built the ring, plywood and blue canvas roped off with cable, halogen lights glaring down from aluminum tripods. Moths swarming the bulbs in a frantic blizzard. By 8 o'clock, half the town had gathered. Word had spread that this wasn't just a charity bout anymore. The rich outsider who'd bought half the valley was finally going to put the town's quietest man in the hospital. People dragged lawn chairs off their trucks, stood in the beds holding cheap beer, waiting for blood. Bryce arrived like a prizefighter walking into an arena, silk robe, gold logo across the back, bass thumping from a portable speaker. 3 training partners flanking him with towels and water bottles. He vaulted the top rope, landed light on the canvas, and let out a yell that made the crowd murmur. Walt drove up alone in his rusted pickup, parked it out on the highway's shoulder, and walked the quarter-mile in the dark. Same jeans he wore to fix fence, plain gray shirt. A roll of white athletic tape in one hand. No entourage, no music, no bag. The crowd parted for him differently than they had for Bryce, not with excitement, but with a strange, uneasy silence. They'd known Walt 20 years, and none of them really knew him at all. Watching him walk toward those lights felt like watching a man walk to the gallows. Sheriff Dale Prout, set to referee, met him at the base of the stairs. "Walt," he said, low and troubled, "you don't have to do this. I'll shut it down right now, call it a hazard. We can fight the property thing in court." Walt looked up at the ring, where Bryce paced like a caged animal, pounding his gloves together. "Court takes years, Sheriff," he said. "This takes 3 rounds." He climbed the steps and ducked through the ropes, boots still on. Bryce laughed. "You're fighting in work boots. I'm going to break your legs, old man." Walt said nothing. He wrapped his own hands, slow, practiced, figure 8 around the knuckles, thumb locked, wrist anchored, his eyes never leaving Bryce. The noise of the crowd fell away. He was stepping down into a dark, quiet room in his own mind, unlocking a door he'd welded shut 2 decades ago in a war zone half a world away. Prout called them to the center. Bryce refused to touch gloves, glaring down, hunting for a flicker of fear. He found nothing, Just avoid. Standard rules, Prout shouted. No strikes to the back of the head, no eye gouges, no groin shots. Protect yourselves at all times. Understood? Understood, Bryce barked. Walt gave a barely there nod. Prout raised his hand. The crowd went silent, nothing but the hum of a generator and moths hitting hot bulbs. Fight! Bryce moved first, blindingly fast, closing the gap with a shifting slide step. He faked a jab, dipped his hips, and fired a hard leg kick meant to deaden Walt's thigh and chop his base out. Walt didn't check it. He didn't retreat. He stepped straight inside the arc of the kick, killing its power before it could build, Bryce's shin slapping harmlessly against his hip. Then his open palm shot forward like a piston, driving square into the center of Bryce's chest. The crack echoed over the generator hum. The air blasted out of Bryce's lungs. His mouthpiece hit the canvas. His eyes went wide with panic. Walt didn't pause. Bryce, gasping, threw a wild overhand right, pure panic, no technique. Walt slipped it by dropping 3 inches, stepped behind Bryce's lead leg, hooked under his arm and turned his hips. Bryce's feet left the canvas. He hung in the halogen glare for half a second before Walt drove him straight down into the plywood. The whole ring shuddered. Chalk dust rose in a cloud. 300 people sucked in a breath at once and went dead silent. Walt settled into side control, dropped his knee into Bryce's ribs, and Bryce screamed, a high, thin sound that carried out over the dark highway. "Ref, break it up!" one of Bryce's friends shouted. Bryce thrashed, tried every trained escape he knew, bridging, framing, shrimping. None of it worked. Moving Walt was like trying to shift a vault door. Every time Bryce fought for space, Walt's knee ground a quarter-inch deeper into his ribs. It wasn't a match anymore. It was a slow, deliberate suffocation. Bryce finally went still and looked up, expecting rage, expecting gloating. Instead he found nothing at all, a slack, focused stillness. Walt's eyes locked on his throat like it was a valve that needed shutting off. For the first time, real fear cracked through Bryce's ego. He understood too late that he hadn't climbed into a cage with a washed-up rancher. He'd climbed in with a ghost. Walt slid his forearm across Bryce's throat, angling the pressure onto the artery, not the windpipe. Bryce clawed at his wrist with both hands. It did nothing, like pulling on the roots of an old tree. The halogen lights blurred to gray in Bryce's vision. The shouting faded into rushing water. "You want to pave my road," Walt said quietly, almost conversationally. Bryce tried to answer and only choked. His legs kicked uselessly against the canvas. "You think money makes you dangerous. You think a belt makes you a killer." Bryce's eyes bulged. All the arrogance was gone, burned away, replaced by one single animal need: air. He released Walt's wrist and tapped frantically on his shoulder. "Surrender." Walt held it one more agonizing second, long enough for Bryce to feel the full weight of his own helplessness. In that second, something in Walt strained against its cage, wanting to finish it. It took more strength to let go than it had taken to start. He released the hold, stood, and stepped back. Bryce rolled onto his side, coughing, sucking down air, curling into himself, tears cutting through the chalk dust on his face. The fairgrounds were silent. Nobody cheered. Nobody booed. Just 34 seconds on the clock and a crowd too stunned to make a sound. Walt looked down at his own taped hands. They were shaking, the leftover tremor of old adrenaline he despised. He walked to his corner, tore the tape off both wrists, balled it up, and tossed it over the rope near his stunned onlookers' feet. "Call it," he told the sheriff. Prout knelt by Bryce, who waved him off weakly, still unable to stand. Prout rose, walked to the center, and raised his hand. "Match is over. Winner, Walt Sutton." No applause. Just a low, uneasy murmur as Walt ducked out of the ring and walked down the stairs. The crowd gave him even more room than before. One of Bryce's training partners stood blocking his path, red-faced with leftover loyalty and embarrassment, fists balled but shoulders tense. "You got lucky, old man," he said, no conviction behind it. Walt turned his head slowly, the flat, dead stare returning. "Do not," he said, "make me do this twice." The man's color drained. He stepped aside without another word. Walt walked out past the murmuring crowd, past the creaking Ferris wheels, into the dark. At his truck, he pressed his forehead against the cool metal of the door and stood there a long moment, letting the night air settle the tremor in his hands. The steel door in his mind creaked shut again, the lock sliding back into place. He climbed in, and the old V8 rumbled to life, steady and familiar. He drove home. At this point, most people figured that was the end of it. It wasn't, not quite. Monday morning, the sun rose over Ironwood like a sheet of hammered copper. Walt was out at the fence line by 6, dew still heavy on the sagebrush, pulling a fresh line of barbed wire tight against a cedar post. His knee ached from the pivot. His back was stiff. Everything else was exactly as it had always been. A county truck rolled up and pulled onto the shoulder. A surveyor in a yellow vest stepped out with a clipboard. "Morning, Mr. Sutton." "Morning," Walt said, not breaking rhythm. "Wanted to give you a heads up," the surveyor said, tipping his hard hat against the rising sun. "Kessler pulled his permits Friday night. Gate project's canceled for good. He's rerouting his whole driveway to the north side, straight to the interstate. Leaves this easement alone completely." Walt twisted the wire tie and clamped it. "Is that right?" "Yep," the surveyor said, chuckling. "Heard he left for California Saturday morning. Said something about corporate restructuring. Took his whole crew with him. That glass house on the ridge is sitting empty." Walt set his pliers back in his tool pouch and leaned on the top wire, looking down the road. No dust cloud, no high-pitched engine in the distance. Just wind moving through dry grass. "Well," he said quietly, "fence makes a good neighbor." The surveyor tipped his hat and drove off. Walt stayed leaning on the post a while, watching the empty road, feeling a knot in his shoulders he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying finally let go. 300 acres of dry, stubborn earth. Not much, but quiet again. Some fights aren't about trophies. They're about protecting the peace you bled for in the first place. Walt never wanted the violence, but he knew exactly how to use it the moment someone forced his hand. Real strength doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. So that's the story. What would you have done if you were in Walt's boots? Walk away or stand your ground? Let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from tonight. If you liked this one, hit that like button, subscribe for more stories like it, and I'll see you in the next one.